Today, we are diving deep into the really curious case of Streptococcus oralis. You can think of this bacterium as a classic frenemy that lives inside our mouths. See, most of the time, it's just a harmless, even helpful resident. But if it escapes, it can turn into a seriously dangerous pathogen, causing life-threatening infections of the heart. So, how can one tiny organism play such drastically different roles? Well, let's get into it. But before we jump in, just a quick heads up on where this info comes from. This whole explainer is built on a really comprehensive literature review we did using Gemini Deep Search, and the fantastic images you'll see are from MicroCanvas. If you want to check out all the papers and sources for yourself, the full list is in the linked notebook. All right, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to unpack the two-faced nature of this bacterium. Then we'll get into the weeds of why it's so tricky to identify in the lab. After that, we'll look at exactly how we treat the infections it causes, and we'll wrap up by covering the best ways to keep them from happening in the first place. So first up, let's explore this dual nature of Streptococcus oralis. And this isn't just some academic fun fact. This Jekyll and Hyde personality is precisely what makes it so clinically important, and honestly, such a fascinating puzzle for any microbiologist. To really get a grip on Streptococcus oralis, you've got to know this term pathobiont. As you can see, it's a microbe that's normally totally harmless, even helpful, but can flip a switch and become a pathogen under the right, or I guess the wrong circumstances. It's really all about location, location, location. In the mouth, it's your friend. In the bloodstream, it's a serious foe. This slide just captures the paradox perfectly, doesn't it? On the left side, you've got the good guy version. It's a pioneer in our mouths, it helps build healthy communities, and it even defends against troublemakers. But then you look to the right, and you see the bad guy, the exact same organism, now loose in the bloodstream, attacking the heart and causing these devastating infections like endocarditis. So this dual personality creates a massive headache for the clinical lab. How do you accurately identify an organism that can be either totally harmless or straight up deadly? As we're about to see, it is a real conundrum. The heart of the problem really lies in its family tree. See, Streptococcus oralis is part of the Streptococcus mitis group, which is, well, it's a notoriously complex bunch. Like the slide says, these bacteria are constantly swapping genes, which just blurs the lines between species. You can think of it like a family where everybody looks alike and they're always borrowing each other's clothes. And to make it even worse, a really major pathogen, Streptococcus pneumonia, is also part of this group. So you might be thinking, okay, why are we getting so bogged down in the details? Why not just call it Streptococcus mitis group and call it a day? Well, as we're about to see, that little bit of ambiguity can have literal life or death consequences for a patient. And here's the answer. It's a sobering one. A positive blood culture for Streptococcus mitis or Streptococcus oralis means that patient has a 19.4%. That's nearly a 1 in 5 chance of having infective endocarditis. That is a huge risk, and it completely changes how that patient needs to be managed. And this slide just drives the point home. I mean, look at that difference. The risk with Streptococcus pneumoniae is just 1.2%. That's a massive gap. This isn't just about getting the name right on a lab report. It's about accurately assessing a patient's risk and making sure they go down the right clinical path. This is why getting a precise ID is absolutely non-negotiable. Okay, so with the stakes being this high, how does the lab actually solve this puzzle? Let's walk through the whole process, from the old school bench methods to the really powerful molecular tools that we use today. So the investigation always starts with the basics. Under the microscope, we see those classic gram-positive cocci. Then, on a blood agar plate, it forms these small colonies with that telltale green halo, what we call alpha hemolysis. These are our very first clues. Next up, we use biochemical tests to try and rule out its more dangerous cousin, Streptococcus pneumoniae. So as the slide shows, Streptococcus oralis is resistant to optogen and it's insoluble in bile. But, and this is a big but, these tests can only get us so far. They often lead to that really frustrating, ambiguous result, Streptococcus mitis/oralis. We need a better tool. And this is where molecular methods come in and save the day. As you can see, it's a multi-step process. We usually start with MALDI-TOF, which is super fast, but it's only as good as its library. For a more definitive answer, we move to sequencing specific genes like GIRB. And then, the gold standard, the ultimate referee, is multi-locus sequence analysis, or MLSA, which looks at multiple genes to get a highly, highly accurate ID. Okay, so we've got our ID. Now, how do we treat the infection?
Well, fortunately, when it comes to endocarditis caused by this bug, there's a really strong international agreement on the best way to approach it.
The treatment plan really boils down to two key questions that we answer in the lab. First, how susceptible is the bacterium to penicillin? We measure this with a minimum inhibitory concentration, the MIC. And second, is the infection on the patient's own natural heart valve, or is it on a prosthetic one? The answers to those two questions dictate the entire course of therapy. So let's take a look at the Dutch Working Party on Antibiotic Policy, or SWAB, guidelines as an example. You can see the pattern pretty clearly here. For the highly susceptible strains, it's penicillin for 4 weeks if it's a native valve, but that gets bumped up to 6 weeks for a prosthetic valve. Now, if the bug is a bit more resistant, you see that higher MIC, we add gentamicin into the mix for some extra firepower. Now, let's switch over to the American Heart Association, or AHA guidelines. What's so striking here is just how similar they are. The MIC breakpoints are almost identical, and the core logic is exactly the same. Treat longer for prosthetic valves, add gentamicin for the tougher strains. It's a really clear sign that on this topic, the experts around the world are absolutely on the same page. So what about kids? Well, while endocarditis is more rare in children, it's often more severe, especially for kids who have underlying heart conditions. The treatment strategy is very similar to adults, but there is one critical difference. Every single dose of antibiotics must be precisely calculated based on the child's weight. There is absolutely no room for error there. And finally, let's talk about prevention. This is really where our story comes full circle, because the best way to stop these dangerous infections is to go right back to the source, the mouth. As this slide shows, prevention is all about risk stratification. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. For most of us in the general population, the best defense is simple: good oral hygiene. For the high-risk patients, think people with prosthetic valves or a history of endocarditis, we use preventative antibiotics before certain procedures. And for immunocompromised patients, like those going through chemo, it's all about proactive dental care and really meticulous hygiene. This quote really gets to the heart of the modern prevention strategy. It's not the one-off dental cleaning that's the biggest risk. It's the small, daily shower of bacteria that gets into the bloodstream from routine things like just brushing your teeth. That cumulative exposure over time, that's the real danger. And that's why the focus has shifted to maintaining great oral health all the time, not just taking an antibiotic before one procedure. And that brings us to a final, forward-looking question. We know Streptococcus oralis is everywhere, and we know it's a hot spot for swapping antibiotic resistance genes. So, as our genomic tools get sharper and sharper, allowing us to see this organism and its evolution with incredible detail, how do we need to adapt our public health surveillance to stay one step ahead of the next threat? I really hope this journey into the paradoxical world of Streptococcus oralis was helpful. If you enjoyed this explainer, please do subscribe to the channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any questions you have down in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks so much for watching.